Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Dr. Claude Anderson said that whenever you see black people, they're always having some sort of illicit relationship with a ball. They're either bouncing a ball, throwing a ball, hitting a ball, or having a ball. Though when it comes to black celebrities, I think we should add a fifth category, and that's black people being hit by a ball, a wrecking ball. Federal authorities allege that as early as 2019, that's during the first Trump administration, there began rigged poker games backed by the Bonanno, Gambino, and Genovese crime families. They weren't the only ones involved in organizing these games, but these guys are mafia families, and they were somehow involved, so as far as the feds are concerned, might as well go ahead and mention them. Now, at these rigged games, they had shuffling machines that were set up to scan the cards so they could tell who would get what, and they also had other means to make certain that players would lose all their money. And what part did the NBA players like Chauncey Billups and others have in all this? The feds claimed that Billups was there to lure big players in because they would be starstruck at the opportunity to hang out with them. And the feds alleged that Billups received some money from some of these rigged games. But the main accusations against these NBA players in the indictment is to accuse them of selling insider information about the injury report that wasn't public knowledge. Who was going to play, who wasn't, etc., which, if you're a gambler who bets on sports, which is the main thing that people bet on these days, that would give you a huge advantage if you had that information. So the inference by a number of people that these NBA players are mobbed up, that's just plain sensationalizing. It seems that some people got roped into this through acquaintances, friends of friends. They got in over their heads. It may not have been innocent mistakes, but they were mistakes nonetheless. Nobody's mobbed up. There's more than 30 co-defendants in this case accused, along with the prominent NBA figures, but the only ones that are making the news are Portland Trail Blazers coach Chauncey Billups, Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier, and former NBA player Damon Jones. All are facing criminal charges. Billups and Rozier were placed on immediate leave from their respective teams, with Rozier's attorney issuing a statement declaring that Rozier is not a gambler. Billups' attorney also released a statement denying Billups' alleged role in the rigged poker games and emphasizing that Billups did not gamble on basketball games. Now, if that does indeed turn out to be the case, there's going to be a number of individuals who jump to conclusions who are going to be finding themselves having to either issue a retraction, or in many cases, they'll be just trying to slither away from it and pretend like they never said it. I suppose we will see, but that's not the reason that I chose to make this the subject of this morning's briefing. For those of you who are Gen Xers or Boomers who thought that the Italian mafia was defunct and done for after the feds went after them in the early 90s, well, here's the final verdict on that one. You see, cases like this are very good for prosecutors' careers. Rudy Giuliani certainly made his career off of prosecuting mobsters. For those of you who don't remember, that's how he came to prominence in the first place. But what about the mobsters themselves? These prosecutors weren't able to bring cases against them because the prosecutors were so brilliant. It's usually because these guys put themselves in the trick bag. The flashy mobsters, the dumb ones, they were the ones who got caught. But the smart ones laid low. They lurked in the shadows. Gee, if you didn't know better, you'd swear that someone had advised people that running around drawing attention to yourself is weak, stupid, and bound to get you into trouble. I talked about people like Hush Puppy, the notorious Nigerian scammer who made millions off of illegal online fraud and is now cooling his heels in federal prison. That clown was posting the proceeds of his illegal operations for the world to see because attention was more important to him than money, so he got his attention and lost his money and his freedom. And of course, there was the case of Frank Lucas, the big-time dope dealer from the 1970s who flew totally under the radar, just collecting his millions without anyone having a clue. That is, until the one time that he simply couldn't resist the urge to go to a prize fight wearing a big chinchilla coat that cost somewhere around $100,000. Now, he could have easily worn a very expensive suit, but no, this was his chance to show the world who he was and how much he was worth. He was trying to impress people, and he did, including the police. And when he did that, he was on everyone's radar, and eventually he was in a cage. When it comes to organized crime, there's a kind of Darwinism that takes place. The smart crooks adapt to the times, the dumb ones don't. But the really wise gangsters, they don't draw any attention to themselves. You don't even know that they exist. Carlo Gambino, the patriarch of the Gambino crime family, was himself someone who made it a point to fly under the radar. When the New York Times wrote about him in 1971, the headline read, "Gambino, Quiet Man in the Spotlight." This while he was under investigation by the feds. Smithsonian's website described the difference between Carlo Gambino and John Gotti. Gambino led a nondescript existence, had no big mansion, didn't draw attention to himself running around town with girlfriends. At the other end of the spectrum was John Gotti, who started to believe his own press. And that's why Carlo Gambino, the head of the nation's biggest and most violent mafia family, died a free man at his home, while John Gotti spent the last 10 years of his life rotting in a cage where he died. And a similar dynamic happened with the Colombian drug cartels. The guys who were being all flashy, like Pablo Escobar and the Cali cartel, wound up dead or in prison. And the ones who were left after that were the smart ones, more cunning, who understood that you got to go ahead and collect your money without drawing a high profile. So that's the reason why 30 years after the alleged end of the Italian mafia, you're just now finding out that they didn't go away at all. They simply went underground. There's a lesson in that somewhere which unfortunately too many black folks refuse to learn. Now, one thing that I'm not going to do is to speculate on the why in this case, because a lot of people have basically been saying, well, these guys, surely they must have had big money problems. Nobody knows what their financial condition is, or whether or not these guys were just merely misguided thrill seekers, or if these guys somehow lost all their cash and this is how they were trying to pay off some debts. Nobody knows. And as far as I'm concerned, whether or not these guys quote-unquote needed the money is actually one of the least interesting aspects about all this. Obviously, the timing of this indictment is no coincidence. This case has been under investigation for years, but the Trump DOJ made sure to wait until the NBA season opener began before they brought the indictment. People like Stephen Smith have said that the hand of the orange man is probably behind this. It's a personal vendetta on his part because NBA players apparently have taken shots at him in the past, or at least the league hasn't kissed his butt with sufficient adoration. He's probably right by all accounts. These events are still unfolding, however, and if it's anything like the Diddy case, whenever the feds go after black defendants, they always seem to get out over their skis a bit and put a bunch of charges on there that don't fit because they're depending on racism to put the black man in prison. But while we can all recognize the open racial bias of the authorities, at the same time, we have to also recognize that these athletes just keep putting themselves into the trick bags. These are the guys who convince themselves that because they got some rich white friends who invite them up to a private party in the hills, some cheese and croissant circuit kind of thing. These are the guys who have conned themselves into believing that they're on the team, and they begin talking the way that their white benefactors do. But reality always gets the last word. If these charges are indeed greatly exaggerated, if not outright false, who's going to stick up for these guys? They're out there by themselves. You take a look at the commentary, even from their own pals like Shaquille O'Neal and the rest of those guys on Inside the NBA, they're throwing them to the wolves. Sitting there saying these guys, they should have known better. They put themselves in a mess. Pro ball players are always talking about how deracinated they are. They're the first ones to lecture us that race is not a problem in their lives, and the black community needs to get over it. If you're in trouble with the law, then that's a personal flaw on your part. Well, I hope that they stick with the respectability politics on this one, too. Is this the end of Billups and Rozier's careers? Of course it is. The NBA and NFL have crushed black athletes for less than this. Now, are any of them going to be going to prison? I don't even think that matters. Jonathan Majors didn't go to prison, and they wrecked his career. Nate Parker didn't even get convicted, and they wrecked his career. Ray Rice didn't go to prison, but he was through in the NFL. Under white supremacy, they don't have to put you in jail in order to destroy you. The mere accusation is enough for them to go ahead and do what they've been wanting to do the whole time. They get a sick glee out of taking some black person and lynching them in the media. That's always a perennial guilty pleasure for the dominant society that never gets old. But apparently for some of these players, their memories get old. When you're black, there's always someone trying to get their hooks into you. There's always someone trying to run you. But these professional athletes, they never seem to learn that the whole world is one big plantation. And no matter how much money they have in the end, they're still out in the field while massa's in the big house. These guys weren't gambling on poker. They weren't gambling on cards or anything else. The big gamble that they were taking was that maybe, just maybe, being black wasn't going to have a bullseye on their backs. That was the real gamble they were making. That was the actual game that was being played here. And, as usual, the house always wins. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Sean St. Thomas, Stephen 12, Keitha Dixon, Aaron Harris, and Kenneth Dickerson. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.